Welcome to Managing Sexuality Intelligently. My name is Jason.
My name is Stephen Ng.
And Steve is a marriage and family therapist. And what we do here is I present Steve a topic, which I've planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. All the topics we discuss are interrelated in one way or another and revolve around Steve's life work, which involves the intelligent management of sexuality. Today we're discussing marriage and why there's no rush to get married. We'll talk about why people do rush to get married and how slowing things down and really getting to know one another can really improve your chances of marital success. Before we get into that, if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question, so be sure to stay tuned for that. All right, Steve. Marriage. You've had two.
Hey, lighten up. Don't start with that. That's awful. We're supposed to be perfect right out of the gate.
Yes. But can we start with your first marriage and discuss what that process was like for you as far as the journey from dating to marriage?
Well, that's really autobiographical. I'm not sure I want to do it that way because you asked two. Did you ask two questions? It was at the beginning of this segment. It was about how long and why do people rush into it? How long should you take and why do people rush into it?
Yeah, I said we'll talk about why people do rush into it and how there is no real rush to do it.
Well, I rushed into it. I guess that's kind of giving us both the answers we're looking for. I rushed into my first marriage, and looking back on it, all I can say is I think it had a lot to do with neediness. Neediness about which I wasn't even self-aware. Of course, I was only 19 when I met my bride-to-be, and then 4 months later, I turned 20, and then a couple months after that, we started dating. A month after that, I asked her to marry me.
Wow.
And a month after that, we got married. So kind of rushed.
Yeah.
And my history is a cautionary tale to those who have not yet made this mistake. Very few of us would recommend it. Now, I know that the media in the form of newspaper articles and romantic stories is full of stories about teenage lovers who are high school sweethearts who got married and lived happily ever after, and now they're celebrating their 50th or their 60th or even their 70th wedding anniversary. But those are outliers. That is not the norm at all. And what we want to do, I think, is learn from our mistakes, but definitely do what we can do to stack the odds in our favor. Because romance is a relationship like any other relationship, and there are things we can do to sabotage the success or really maximize the possibilities of success. And for me, I got married and my mom, it's funny back then, my mom was giving me the advice to not get married, but her rationale was that I was too young. I really don't think it's an age thing. I think for me, I can easily imagine the kind of really helpful sex education from, say, 12 to 18 going through high school that would make people a lot more ready than I was, let me put it that way. I still think there are developmental reasons for men to wait until they're significantly older because I think men take a little bit longer to develop into men. One way I say that is it takes longer to grow a man than it does to grow a woman.
And what would that age be?
Well,
or
approximately? This is gonna. I almost wish you hadn't asked that because I think ideally a man should get married after he's figured out what he wants to be when he grows up, and that he should finish his education, whatever that looks like, whether it's a traditional apprenticeship program or starting a business or going to college, and then sometime after he's invested in his career and got that part of his life figured out, he can then look around. And usually I think it makes sense developmentally for most men to wait till age 30 because the women they would typically choose as partners would be a lot different at age 30 than they would be at age 20.
Yeah.
Whereas I think women are kind of, it's a little more individualistic, I suppose, with women, but generally I think women just mature more readily than men do. and emotionally they have the social skills and the verbal skills to express themselves in a way that's pretty effective in marriage. And those are broad brushstrokes, right? Because there are plenty of 30-year-old women who are not ready to be married to anybody. But it just in general, I think it's more critical, mission critical for men to wait. And if you're having a good life, what's the rush? Because you're using those years to get to know yourself, to get to know what you want out of life, and you can be dating and getting to know what the world of women has to offer, because you may think you understand what women have to offer, but there's a lot of diversity in womankind. And I think the same is true in that way of women who get married prematurely. I think they owe it to themselves to get to know, what is out there, what's going on. And if they're not finding the diversity that they're hoping for, I think they're obviously doing something wrong. Men and women are doing something wrong when when they get so disappointed, and it doesn't matter if you're gay or straight. If we're not meeting the kind of people who we think of as legitimate prospects, it's probably because we're not hanging out in the right places and meeting the kind of people who are actually more or less part of our tribe.
Yeah. And you said that for you, it was a neediness that you felt. So you dated for, what was that, like 6 months maybe?
No, not even. I don't even. No, we started dating after the semester finished. It was the spring semester, excuse me, and then we dated through the summer, and we were married by August. And there's so many. I said neediness, and I could have been more specific. Emotional neediness.
And what by that do you mean? Like, what were you looking to get met emotionally?
Well, I think that I wasn't able to articulate it back then, but I think I was lonely, feeling isolated, and looking for some relief there. I certainly wanted love in my life and was yearning for that. And I couldn't have talked about it nearly as facilely as I am right now, but I was leading with neediness, and as I looked behind me, there was precious little else there, but just a lot of neediness.
But how about religion? Did religion play a role in it too? Because you were religious.
I was religious, and no nookie without the marriage certificate. So you're not supposed to do that. And in hindsight, of course, that doesn't make any sense for most of us in America. But even then, even had it been something I still wanted to adhere to, I still owed it to myself to do a lot more work getting to know my potential partner, and so did she.
Did you feel that the sex part was driving it a lot, or?
Maybe it was, and I'm still not aware of it, but at the time, I don't think it was. I think it was really more just raw emotional neediness.
All right.
So, I could be wrong about that, but I think I'm about the same sexually in terms of appetite and my desires and interests in having sex. And it's not my guiding principle now in my life. So I doubt that it was then.
Okay. And then as far as other people that you see within your practice, do you find that they are getting into marriages in similar ways that maybe do have issues? Because your first marriage had various complications, obviously.
Which I've discussed at length. Yeah, it did have a lot of complications that ultimately proved the demise of the relationship. But I have clients who are representative, I think, of a legitimate cross-section of America. And one of them, who was quite senior, his wife had died not so long ago, and he kind of did what I did. He got married right away to another woman who was in his age group, and so there's nothing remarkable about that. But he failed to do his due diligence, and he failed to really get to know her, and he rued the day. That's how I meet all the people I meet, right? Is people are having a hard time. And then recently I met someone who was a former client, and he admitted to me that he had not taken counseling very seriously. He was in his 40s, and he was not only unhappily married, but actually frightened of how unhappy he was. And so he was in my office looking for answers, because now it meant something to him. So I don't think it's about age. I really think it's about mindset and the sort of activities we should all be engaged in before we get married, because we really need to qualify prospects, just like business people qualify business prospects prior to signing a merger agreement or taking on a new business partner.
Mhm.
You want to check their background, their finances. Do I like their personality? Can we get along? Would we agree on a notion of governance in the company? All kinds of things. And most of us don't do that. We find out, do they like me and are, enough, to have sex with me? And yeah, we're good to go.
Yeah. Do you find that a lot of people who do have marriages where they rush into it? I mean, most people who come to you with their problems with marriages aren't doing the work that we talk about, such as the intentional interview, or even if they do have a marriage be prior, they're not reviewing it and doing their due diligence and examining where it fell apart, what went wrong,
Yeah, what they learned.
And
yeah, what was their part in the
mm,
in the failure? Because nobody, I call it a failure, and I think justifiably, because nobody gets married with the idea of building a divorce.
yeah.
We're trying to have a happily ever after, and when we fail, I think we owe ourselves and our future mate a critical incident debriefing. And that's a phrase that gets used by the military and lots of first responders when they look at something that was very negative, like someone getting injured on the job. And I think that if we don't do a critical incident debriefing that can take not one afternoon or not a couple of weeks of reflection, but in my case, 18 years of marriage, I would say that took place over years. Not 1 year, but I mean like years and years of reflecting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during that time, admittedly, I was dating, but I wasn't like thinking only about my failed marriage. But I would lie back and muse, or I'd get into a conversation that would stimulate some new line of thought. And I think I just didn't want any of the pain to go to waste.
Mm-hmm.
And
what do you mean? But the pain of
a failed relationship
that you're feeling.
Yeah, the pain of having a marriage that I'd really wanted to go the distance, having it end in ignominy and public disgrace. I'm a failure, and I wanted it to be. I wanted to learn everything I could and suck every drop of meaning I could out of this epic failure.
And you could do the same. So with people out there who are listening who maybe haven't gotten married yet, such as myself and somebody who's had long-term relationships, but you could kind of do the same stuff.
Yeah, even without a marriage certificate, certainly. Yeah, you don't have to be married to take a look at that. Like, why did I, the kinds of questions, why did I pick this person? And what was it about me? What was it about them that made that picking seem to make so much sense initially? What is it about me that made the choice to stay as long as I did? What is it about me that contributed to the unpleasantness or the unhappiness? And all of those questions, once answered, kind of lead us to a new way of thinking about ourselves and our future. So, that critical incident debriefing actually evolved quite naturally into wondering, well, what would I want to know about somebody else before getting involved? What else do I have to change about myself? So to answer the last question first, I needed to develop a life worth living, and a life where I, as a man, could enjoy my life and not have to marry a woman because I had such acute emotional neediness, but instead, or because I needed somebody to do laundry or wash dishes or something. I wanted to create a life where I could be truly what I should have been, a self-sufficient adult with a life that I could really enjoy. And then doing that, getting that kind of figured out more or less, because nobody gets it figured out perfectly, but getting most of that figured out also led to answering the first question, what kind of person should I be with and how would I know? And that's what we talk about when we talk about the intentional interview. So what kind of questions would I need to have the answers to? And if you just sit and wonder, everybody could come up with some. What are you looking for? Everybody has an answer to that, but it's with painful failed experience that we become clearer in our thinking. Oh, that didn't really matter, but this thing I didn't think matter really did matter. We get wiser.
Yeah. What about like, so it's like people, like they could say they don't have, it's a lot of this, like working with you and hearing your concepts. It seems like you're getting clear with like who you are. It's like by creating a life worth living, not rushing into getting married. It's like you almost want to get clear with who you are on every level, like career wise, spiritually, emotionally.
Yeah.
And the more clear you could get, that's when it's more wise than to enter into a marriage, because rather
not knowing that. Yeah, to enter a marriage not knowing those things would be disastrous.
Disastrous, yes. But it's like that's kind of what you're trying to say. Like we're talking about why rushing to get married. It's like you could still date and you don't have to get married, but marriage seems to be something that people don't talk about as like, I think a good advice would be like, don't get married. But because it's like, unless you have a real clear idea of who you are almost.
Right. I think don't get married is good advice, but not by itself. You have to put the context of until you've done the work to figure out mostly who you are
and who the other person is.
Too. And who you need. And yeah, and you do need to figure out each individual candidate as they apply for that leading role in your life. That epic movie that is called Your Future. And I think that if we could do that, I think it's pretty clear most of us wouldn't be dating if we didn't like the person. And then I ask my clients, so if you're dating and you're enjoying her, and they all admit, yes, I am enjoying this relationship, and she'll say, yes, I do love him and I enjoy getting to know him. And then I look at them and say, so what's the rush? What's the rush in tying the knot? Why not take your time and really get to know questions like, and I'll pose a number of questions, and do you know such and such? Do you know such and such? And they'll look at me blankly. And, I'll say something like, here's an easy one. Can you two talk comfortably about sex? Oh, God, yes, of course. And then I'll ask a few more questions. Like, so how many sexual partners has your partner had in the past? What does she think about when she's having sex with you? What is her magic sex number in terms of how often she would like to have sex, ideally in the perfect relationship? And what does she fantasize about when she's masturbating? And I always get these blank looks from, and one guy said to me, well, when you said, could you talk comfortably about sex, I thought you meant asking her if she wanted to do it. And which sounds almost like a Neanderthal or something. Except I don't know if Neanderthals could even talk, but it's overly primitive. It's not nearly enough information when you're trying to evaluate whether this person and I could have a great future together. You would want to know the answers to those and many more questions that aren't sexually related at all, but that are, if you're talking about entering a sexually monogamous relationship and getting your sexual needs met through this one person for the rest of your life, you have the right, I think, to bring up some sexual topics and talk about things. And if he or she is unable to comfortably talk about sexuality with you, or can't even be comfortable enough to begin the conversation, I would say, yeah, that's one you want to let ripen on the tree a little bit longer, because save that one for somebody else, because if they can't even talk comfortably about sexuality, it's going to be really difficult to have a real comfortable sexual relationship.
Do people ever give you reasons when you ask why rush to get married? Do people say because blah 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 religion?
Well, they do give me reasons. Well, I was just really hurting and lonely, and when I met her or met him, and it
Mm.
just seemed like it just seemed. Here's the magical thinking. It just seemed like the right thing to do,
Mm.
or we're believers in, name your favorite religion, and sex with outside of marriage is a sin, and so we didn't think we wanted to have sex, so we got married to have sex,
Mm.
and which always strikes me as odd when religious people say, "Yeah, we got married and we got into holy matrimony so we could get laid."
Yeah.
That's just kind of a weird thing. And then still another client said to me not so long ago, "Well, she asked me to marry her, and I didn't have any defense mechanisms to say no. And she was really hot, and she was just gorgeous. And so, he got married because he didn't know how to say no, and she was really sexually alluring. And what was weird about that was they were already having sex, so it wasn't
Mm.
like the marital condition was a deal breaker one way or the other.
Yeah. So why did he get married then? Or why
Because
did she
she
want?
asked him to.
Why, but why did she want to get married? Does he know that, or
No, he doesn't know that.
and now he's struggling in the relationship?
Yeah, now
Okay.
he's beyond struggling. Beyond struggling.
So it sounds like people aren't even thinking of really exactly why to get married. They're just kind of making up their own reasons, or they're just seems like the right thing to do, religion, or she said yes. It's like they're not really thinking through. Probably to me, and the more I understand this stuff, like the biggest commitment of your life. And I mean, it's not like you could, I mean, at a certain point, you have to take a leap of faith and go and just do it. But I think there's so much prep work to be done, and talking and dating and interviewing and
Yeah, and for a lot of people, that feels like putting off the good parts.
mm,
And so there's a frustration there that we're not going to get to the good stuff because somehow magically the justice of the peace is going to imbue our relationship with all this great stuff. She'll feel secure, and so will I.
mm,
She won't be partying anymore, or he won't be using cocaine anymore, because surely not, because now we're married.
mm,
Now we're doing the grown-up thing, and a lot of that magical thinking, of course, turns out to be false. And again, if it's a wonderful courtship with all kinds of true joy and pleasure in getting to know the other, over dinner or going out on a movie date or going hiking together, or even talking in the bedroom after sex, I don't see a reason to rush it, because it is a big commitment, because you're involving the state. The government is now in your business because you have signed a legal contract.
mm-hmm.
And that legal contract comes with a lot of freight to it, involving money and lawyers and all the rest, which is one reason why so many people are saying no to marriage, because they don't want that.
Mm,
But saying no to marriage, I think, it's a little bit like, I don't know. I think there's a lot of good reasons to get married. I believe in marriage as an institution, but not so much so that I think marriage is more important than people. So if you're going to do your due diligence, and I hope everyone listening to this can wrap their brains around that, before we buy a new car or piece of property, most of us get title insurance, or we at least read consumer reports to see what the reviews on the repair rate is for that vehicle. And I think for romance, we need some real information, and really give ourselves some time to get to know someone. One of my clients, he had spent something like 18 years in prison, and he said, but I didn't waste my time. I really learned a lot about women. I read every romance that was in the prison library.
mm.
And it's like, where do I as a therapist begin that conversation? Because romances are written as a literary expression of a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back, and they live happily ever after. By definition, romances as a genre are about the happy ending. And love those kinds of stories. I'm an American. I want a happy end to a romantic story. But another happy ending to a romantic story is saying, I really like you, but I don't think I'm the right guy for you. That's a really happy ending too, because it means I figured out I'm not with the right person. Mm. And whether he figures it out or she figures it out or they both do together, it's a relief, because what's the percentage of marriages that fail? Well, it's pretty close to half, but the reason it isn't even higher is because, so many people are avoiding marriages now. Just, marriage by another name, when you move in with someone and you're splitting the finances and sharing all the rent and all of that business, maybe even having children together, that's a marriage. Because marriage as a concept preceded religion. People have been partnering up ever since there's been a human race. It precedes the invention of paper upon which marriage certificates are printed. It preceded even the invention of religion that prohibited sex outside of marriage. Wow. So, marriage is part of managing my sexuality intelligently. And so I really want to take it seriously, but it's like taking a wonderful, extremely magical time seriously. Yeah. It's a good time. So getting to know somebody I'm interested in, it isn't like an interview for a job where you got to pay me to conduct those interviews. It's so boring. And it's not like a criminal investigation where, the light is in my face and the cops are trying to beat the truth out of me verbally. It's really a pleasure getting to know one another and asking all those questions and finding those sensitive spots where he or she doesn't really want to talk, and then continuing to safely poke the bear a little bit with that. Say, hey, you seem like you really don't like talking about, I'm just not comfortable talking about sex like that. Well, that's a story. I'd want to follow up for hours on that conversation. Like, what's that discomfort all about? And it isn't, of course, just about sex. It's about tolerance, religion. It's about their feelings about the future, their attitudes toward work, and understanding all about their past and the way they were reared by their family. Hopefully they were not orphaned, but I would want to know all of it. I want to know their relationship history. So there's no end to the intentional interview. My wife and I are still getting to know each other. Every time she listens to one of these podcasts, she learns a little bit more about me as well, which is kind of funny, because I would have thought she would have known so many of the basics about my life, but you ask questions that she hasn't thought of. And I think, again, when you love someone and you find out about their history or their dreams or how they've evolved and grown, even in the year or two that you two have been together, it's fascinating. I'm a guy who freely admits I love sex. I really love women. And I adore my wife. But getting to know someone I'm dating, getting to know my wife, even now after 30 years of being together, it's like so much better than sex. And I like sex a lot, but it's even more meaningful. And I think contextualizes sex in a way that makes sex better as well.
Yeah. The intimacy and getting to know your wife, you're saying, that's the part that gets better for you.
Well, these concepts are all intertwined, aren't they? I mean, you can't get to know somebody without intimacy. And that's simply making the room safe enough for us to both be ourselves. And that in turn, when we do have sex, it's going to make sex a more pleasurable experience, because we can relax and more freely be ourselves with one another. But you would think my wife and I would have ironed that out after like 1 year. But no, it's ever growing, it's ever evolving. And why is that? Well, because she keeps growing and changing and evolving as a human being. So my belief systems, her belief systems, our values, the people we like, the books we read, the music we discover, all of it keeps changing us. And it's fascinating to watch or to be a witness to that evolution of a human being.
And would you say that is one of the greatest benefits of marriage, like to create that sort of level of intimacy with another person?
That's a really good question. Actually, as much as I think I would say intimacy is the first step to the greatest payoff for marriage, because the greatest payoff for marriage is that we are a couple who have now joined forces and pooled our resources so that we can face life's challenges together as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing all of this, we are more effective in solving all of the problems and challenges life brings us. So whether it's building wealth or having children or raising normal children for a change, it's all part of that really solid relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it's an end in itself, because even if my wife and I never had kids, I would be perfectly content just enjoying her and getting to know her. And the two of us I would consider to be a family. But sharing our careers and building a family and having a home together and exploring this world as the years go by, I feel that journey together has been so companionable that, I have other compartments in my life, like friendship and career, that I work on separately for the most part from my marriage. But the marriage, once I feel like I've checked that box, it's really freed my mind and freed my intellect to have a lot more bandwidth to address business, to address friendship, to address creative endeavors like writing books and that kind of thing.
And is that because you're committed to one person rather than thinking of all the women that you're falling in love with?
Well, that's, again, a good question. And I don't think it's about, commitment is a hard one to talk about. I do believe in commitment. It's not like I'm trying to avoid that conversation, but I think commitment is an evolving sort of thing, right? So we have different levels of commitment. Like right now, I would say most people listening to this podcast may not have thought about it, but they have a commitment even to strangers they don't even know, as opposed to the stranger who lives on the other side of the planet they don't even know exists up on a mountain in the Himalayas. Mm-hmm. The stranger who walks by my office building and then clutches his chest and he falls to the ground and stops moving, the decent thing for me to do, I feel like I have a commitment as a member of the community to go out and check on him, to help take care of him. And that's a human commitment I think we all have to strangers. And then there are commitments to acquaintances that are a bit deeper. And then to the men I would call buddies or pals. They're not like in the inner circle of my friendships, but I could put it in financial terms that, yeah, they could hit me up for a loan or for even a gift of money. And can you give me $20? And if it was something that I could afford, the answer is, yeah, sure. Here you go. And because I want to be treated that way in return when I need money for gas or something. And when it comes to my dearest friends who are in my inner circle, it's pretty much the sky's the limit. They get access to the full checkbook, and if they need money to do something that's mission critical right now, like getting bail to get out of jail or something like that, absolutely they get it. And if they need a medical procedure, of course, if I could afford that, I would step up and pay for that, or at least help pay. And I think if we go forward from there, then I think marriage comes after all those commitments, because none of, as much as I love my friends, my close inner circle friends, none of them do for me the things Sharon does for me. Yeah. So she gets access to all of that and a whole lot more. And so you can see there's, it's kind of like going from the shallow end of the pool to a deeper end of the pool. And the commitments just get deeper. And that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I like that. That's a cool way of looking at it.
Yeah. Now, so you asked me about commitment, and what was I can't even remember the question. Because there was a context to, do you think it's all just about, the marriage is about the commitment, or?
Yeah, I can't remember either. But
Well,
let's move on to another thing. I have another question that popped up. So is there like, so say for people who are thinking about getting married, is there any number in particular as far as a timeline goes, or is that a personal thing, or do you have like a minimum that you like to tell your clients, or do you kind of let them do their own thing? I know therapists aren't supposed to be telling people what to do.
right, right. But I think some guidelines from a person who had some clarity of thought would be helpful and not hurtful. I'm not real rigid about any of this, but I think most of us don't know what it means even to really get to know somebody.
Yeah.
And so, what I ask my clients is to imagine the asexual test. If your girlfriend, or if I'm talking to a woman, if your boyfriend did not have the genitalia that they have, and there was no chance the two of you were ever going to have sex, would you be interested in sharing the rest of your life with this person?
Yeah, that's a good that's a good test.
Yeah, I mean, do you know enough about them to know that it would be so wonderful and so satisfying that you absolutely would want to share your life with that person? Because I remember getting to know Sharon, and we met like over a phone call, and we logged hundreds of hours of conversation, slowly getting to know each other, slowly becoming more intimate.
And were you talking every day, or is it every?
We were, I mean, not at first, but
like teenagers, like
yeah, kind of
after school, except after work, and
exactly. And
you're laying on the bed with on your stomach and your feet.
Well, I used to come home from work pretty late, and I would have the phone between my shoulder and my ear, and with my neck getting into a condition that my chiropractor loves. And then I'd be cooking here in Reno, and she was out of state, and she would be talking to me probably from the pillow, resting, and because there was even a different time zone. And we logged those hundreds of hours getting to know each other, where the intimacy grew and grew and grew. And part of that was holding the relationship so loosely because we both assumed we would never meet, at least initially.
And that allowed you to be more open and free.
Yeah.
To say whatever you wanted to say, because you're like, well, this ain't going to go anywhere.
Right. And as I've said before, it was such a pleasant experience. I was in absolutely no hurry for that phase of the relationship, the getting to know you phase. I was in no hurry for that to end. And frankly, I enjoyed the conversation so much, even if she had said, yeah, I'm going to get married next week or next month to this other guy. I actually cared enough about her that I would have been happy for her happiness. And I would hope, although I don't think it's probably likely, that we would have still been able to continue talking. Her husband might have had a problem with that, as they went to sleep, and she's still talking on the phone late at night. But it was just such a pleasure that the whole idea of having sex was it was really an afterthought, and I'm saying that as a guy who, as I say, I like women, I like sex, I like physical intimacy, but we were having emotional intimacy, sharing feelings, historic intimacy, sharing our mutual stories or our individual stories about our past and how we got where we are, our stories of failure in our former relationships. We were sharing, doing the critical incident debriefing we were just talking about. And then I was still asking questions as if we were dating. And it was a lot like a date, just talking on the phone. But it was really an experience in getting to know someone. And it was so helpful. So when I give people advice on, well, how long in general do you think? I always advise young people to consider dating at least 30 people.
Yeah.
Which at first may seem like a daunting number, but 30 is, I think, a pretty easy number to rack up, because a lot of dates don't make it past the first date.
Is that 30 in your lifetime, or 30 like after, say, something like a divorce or a breakup, or?
Well, both. I mean, 30 before you make any commitment.
Okay. Of
even the first or the second.
Oh, that's.
Yeah, because I think if you're coming out of high school and you've had one sweetheart all through high school, I think you really owe it to yourself to do your due diligence and see what other kinds of oranges are on the stand.
Yeah.
As you pick them up and you examine them,
Mm-hmm.
some are bigger or better or more orange or more delicious, and they have more to offer. So comparison shopping is something we should, I think, owe ourselves. And a lot, as I was saying before, though, a lot of first dates don't become second dates. A lot of second dates don't go any farther than that.
Does that count? Just the first date with one person, that counts as one of the 30?
Absolutely. Okay. I think it has to count. But then there'll be other dating relationships or romances that go 3 months, 6 months, 12 months.
All right.
So again, there's no rush, and there's nothing magical about 30. I could have said 25. But just aiming for 30, being open to 30. Mm-hmm. And if you find the most amazing offer that you could even imagine, it's just this other person is really something that you, after a year of dating them or 6 months or whatever it is that you think is the time that you needed to really get to know them, I think then maybe you could be forgiven for only dating 25 or 20. But I would also say, even myself, I earn my living getting to know people, getting to know, as the song says, all about them, and to get to know the things that they don't even know about themselves, and communicating right back with them in a helpful way. And in my own romances, I couldn't do that in less than a year. So if you can do better than I can do, more power to you. But again, if it's the right person, all of this dating is a pleasure and there is no rush. Mm-hmm. So if you're dating and enjoying the heck out of it, why not date another year? Or without putting a limit on it, why not just continue to date until it's like so freaking self-evident that you've got really only one step left, and that's marriage.
Yeah, because and you're learning throughout these dates too about yourself, what you want, what you don't want, and
and what I can give and what I can't give in terms of her needs. Mm-hmm. And I know for me that whole business of waiting, it wasn't like I was waiting. I really wasn't waiting. I was indulging. I was indulging left and right in the joy of getting to know her, and really experiencing her company and what that was like. So I didn't feel like I was exercising any kind of virtuous moderation or anything like that. I was a hedonist, just stuffing myself with pleasure, and it was so great that why would I step away from the table when there's all this delicious food still waiting for me to gobble up? So there's that, but at some point I do recommend people take commitment, coming back to that word, incrementally, because we can in this day and age. And why not? Because sometimes marriage can change people for any number of reasons, and people evolve over time. So if I've dated somebody for 1 or 2 years, really gotten to know them, and the two of us have talked about marriage, talked about living together, talked about all the other things people in that position do, I think it would be reasonable to think about sharing a residence and what that would look like. Of course, there's going to be financial conversations around that. How would we afford that? Who would pay for what? What would be fair? I think there's no fairness. It really depends on the relationship and the two individuals involved. If he makes $100,000 a year and she makes $25,000 a year, I don't think it's fair to say, let's split it all down the middle.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it is fair to split things down the middle. And like I remember for me in the courtship phase, I expressed that I was interested in an abuse-free relationship based on equality, and I was glad to take responsibility for initiating 50 to 80% of the social engagements, like dating. But I really wanted my partner to initiate stuff like that too. And, whether it was going to a movie or having me over for dinner or hanging out at the mall or going for a walk, whatever. And it got to I would say it was pretty close to 50-50 through the 2 years that I was getting to know my wife. And it was an amazing experience. I'd never done that before. So, and it's funny when I talk to younger people, and as my children say, I'm like really old. But when I talk to really young people, it's dating is such a quaint idea, including, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual. For some people, it's just so quaint because why would you do that? That's an artifact of ancient history. For a lot of young people, there's this impulse to get committed. No, I don't want to date until I'm with somebody who can commit. Well, the whole purpose of dating is that it's a romantic, it's an intentional rendezvous with a romantic / sexual agenda. I'm trying to get to know this person as a potential mate. And dating them allows me to get to know them to see if I even want to make a commitment.
Yeah.
And if he or she doesn't feel comfortable having sex, that's fine. Because if they don't bring enough to the party to make dating and conversation interesting, apart from sex, then I don't want to be with them anyway. So I think dating, and I can date, because dating is not a commitment, I can date 3 or 4 different women at a time. And I might date some women for specific reasons, like, oh, she's a really good skier and I like to ski, and so we go skiing together, and my other girlfriends don't ski, and so of course we never do that together. But I think women have that liberty as well, especially here in the United States. I think whereas in maybe some more conservative countries that would be considered slutty behavior and even dangerous behavior to date more than one man at a time, I see no reason to not do that. It's really, again, like going in the grocery store and doing some comparison shopping and picking up 2 different cans of peas and reading the labels and looking at the price tags. And I think we need to kind of think like that when we're evaluating potential mates.
Yeah. Well, if we don't do that work, I mean, how do we learn? It's like, I mean, you can listen to podcasts like this, but I think you really have to actually do it and experience it.
Right. It can't be theoretical.
It can't be theoretical to actually learn what you even want. So it's like, and it's not like you have to be everyone you date, you don't have to be having sex with or doing, I mean, whatever the comfort is within the relationship.
Yeah. I think sex at that point becomes something of a, it's not driven by pure neediness or because out of a lack of intimacy, I just want to have an illusion of intimacy. And so I'm going to have sex with this person so I can get that affirmation from the other person agreeing to have sex with me and the affection from the sexual act itself. And I can have all of that approval and all the rest of it that goes with sex. But I may not even have a relationship worth having. When we're having sex, especially those hookups that are just one night stands. And I'm not against one night stands. I mean, if people want to do that, I'm not trying to be judgmental about that. There may be a time and place to do that and to do that safely. But I would also caution not just women, but men out there that humanity has a lot going for it. But one of the things going against it is we have a fairly high rate of mental disorders. And the idea that you're going to have sex should be accompanied by the thought, but I want it to be safe sex. Now, safe sex, everybody goes to a condom in their thoughts, when they think about safe sex. But what if they're mentally ill? What if the person you're getting together with and you've taken like 2 hours to get to know before you're going to go have sex with them? You don't really know them at all. And they could be any of several very unpleasant, they could have, I should say, not be, have a number of unpleasant mental health disorders. They might have some really pernicious behavior that includes abuse and disrespect. So I really think before 2 people get naked and into a bed, that it's pretty important that they do their due diligence and get to know this person a little bit.
Yeah, check their medicine cabinet for any prescription drugs.
Well, yeah, and get their references. Like, I want to know who you've dated before and what was going on there. I want to know about your past, and really take a little bit of time. and maybe, I mean, there's so many things that could go into making the sex a lot safer, but I don't think, I personally would never have sex with a stranger because I think it's just too fraught with terrible things that can go very badly.
And then, so then going back to that number, as far as did you give one as far as like how long to date? Like,
Yeah,
is
for
it like,
me, I said a year
oh, a
or
year?
a year.
Okay.
But I enjoyed, and I took 2 years in my current relationship. But I'm not saying that's a rule. I think the
No, yeah.
rule is you date them as long as you're enjoying dating, and you get married when you've done everything else that comes before that in terms of commitment, because marriage is a legal commitment
Hmm.
involving lawyers and judges and courtrooms,
Yeah.
and can be very expensive and very emotionally unpleasant.
What if someone's like, oh yeah, everything's great. We dated for a year or 2 years. We did 2 years of getting to know each other, but there's these like two or three things that are like really kind of not working out that well, but it's like, everyone has something and we're going to get married. Is that something that is normal or should happen or?
I hear that a lot.
Mhm.
Nobody's perfect. If I keep waiting for somebody perfect, well, we're not waiting for somebody perfect. We're waiting for the perfect person for you.
Mhm.
I'm not the perfect person for the vast, overwhelming majority of American women. But luckily for me, I am the perfect guy for my wife.
Mhm.
And she is the perfect woman for me. Do I think, I don't believe in the notion of soulmate. I think I'm a pretty simple person. I think most of us are pretty simple, but there's still that issue of compatibility. And just because it's kind of like blood work, right? If just because I need a blood transfusion and somebody else has blood doesn't mean their blood is the right blood for me.
Mhm.
So I need to go ahead and perform my due diligence and check that out, or at least the doctor needs to do that. And so, in the same way, imagining, I think for anybody listening to this, imagine something that's annoying you, but because you're really in a little bit of a place of neediness, you're tempted to make the compromise and you want to go ahead and get married. But then think it through, because marriage isn't for a day or a week. It's for a lifetime, ideally. And some of the things that we could deal with, say in year number 1, by year number 15, are like just killing me.
Mhm.
And, like I notice, let's say, in terms of compatibility, there's so many different continuums to talk about. But in terms of compatibility, if I'm the sort of person who feels most comfortable on a scale of 1 to 10 regarding neatness and tidiness in the home, I'm pretty comfortable around a 7. And I could flex down to a 6 or
Mhm.
up to an 8 if she was a 6 or an 8. So I've got a little bit of a range there. I've met 10s. I'm not comfortable with the 10 because
Mhm.
their houses are like
Museums.
yeah, or more like a clean room where they're
Mhm.
assembling a satellite. One speck of dust and it's ruined. And I want, um, but I couldn't be with a 2 or a 3 or a 4.
Mhm.
I just couldn't, because I would be annoyed.
Yeah.
And could I date her happily? Oh gosh, yes. I mean, I could date her forever probably if
Mhm.
everything else was there. But to actually live with the person, now that may make me sound horribly petty, and I'm willing to live with that, but it's simply true. And I'm just trying to be humble and open about it with the listeners,
Mhm.
because I think there are a lot of issues like that.
Yeah.
If I like, how about personal hygiene? If, again, let's say I'm a 7,
Mhm.
um, far from perfect, but a 7, reasonably above average. And I meet someone who can't have sex with me until she's showered. And that's the way it is every single time.
Mhm.
That would be uncomfortable for me and would start bugging me. Wouldn't bug me on the first weekend we had sex
Yeah.
because it's all new and fun, but it would bother me after 1,000 times of
Yeah.
that. And it would be the same with somebody who was, say, again, a 3 or a 4
Mhm.
on a scale of 1 to 10, because I'd be wondering, really, is she ever going to shower?
Yeah.
I mean, she really needs to shower, honey.
Yeah.
When was the last time you showered? And so I want someone who's compatible, but there is, that old saying, cleanliness is next to godliness. It's ridiculous. There's no moral virtue in being cleaner or dirtier than somebody else, whether it's the way you keep house or the way you take care of your personal hygiene. It's just up to me. It's really about all of us being humble enough to own our fragility on certain issues. And for some women, I think, gosh, I mean, I can think of any number of things that have bothered different women in my life, even just my face or my voice or the way I think about politics or my disrespectful attitude toward religion or whatever it is that would be a deal breaker, right? We should all be honoring that and taking a look at those things, because if it's a deal breaker and it's going to keep one of us from being really happy, why on earth would you marry somebody with whom you're not going to be really happy?
So do you feel relieved when they break up to you? Because like, I just don't like your face. It's like, and you're like, oh, thank God, because I know like down the line you'd hate me for that, and it would never work.
Well, I always hold out hope, because even a guy like Henry Kissinger was able to find love in this world. But I think, for me, the experience on that silly issue of my looks would be, she's probably not going to want to go out with me in the first place. So I get cut from the herd pretty early on, and the selection is made. And it's the same for a lot of things, but some of these things we don't know until we really get to know somebody. And I just hate the idea of saying, or of someone telling me in my office, well, she's got these things that really bug me, but nobody's perfect. And it's like, okay, have you told her?
Yeah.
Well, no, because I know it would just upset her. Now, see, the secrecy really bothers me more than anything else.
Yeah.
Because it's not because he's so tolerant. He's afraid of talking about things that are bothering him for some reason. And I suspect it's because he's afraid of losing the relationship. And that is not the attitude we can go into these things with. To get a good deal in a used car lot, you have to walk in with an open mind and being willing to walk away from every car on the lot. To make a good deal in romance, the same mindset has to be there. She might look like $1 million, or like whatever movie star you think is most attractive. He might be the guy who just seems like the perfect catch. But if you find out all these other things that we're talking about, like let's say he didn't mention, he just said the past is the past. I think we should just care about what happens from here on in, and you're great for me and I'm great for you, and then you find out something from their past that, had you known about it, it would have really put a hitch in your giddy up. And I think there are a lot of things like that, criminal histories, the fact that they never learned anything from their past relationships, the fact that maybe they were always abusive or frequently abusive in their past relationships. I've met all of these cases in my office, and all the information was always right there. The people who come to my office come with complaints, of course, if they're talking about marriage counseling. And I asked them, well, how is it you didn't know this before you got married? Well, I just thought he would stop. Yeah. Or I just, when she gave me her promise she'd quit smoking after we got married, I believed her. And all the information was there, but in hindsight, a lot of us were pathologically naive and really not doing our due diligence.
Yeah. Well, out of all of this, then it's take your time, ask questions, get to know everyone. Like, how do you sum all this kind of up? It's just take your time, enjoy the dating process, learn from your mistakes.
If my wife had said to me, no, I don't want to get married, when I popped the question.
Back in your first marriage?
No, in my second.
Oh, second.
And she said, no, I don't want to get married right now. We would have had an interesting conversation about that, because I think that her answer would have been interesting. But but it wouldn't have been the end of us. It would have continued being enjoyable. you know, and maybe she just needed more time
Yeah.
than what I had taken. But I think we're supposed to solve everything, cross every T, dot every I, and we're supposed to really feel solid. You know, the image, I think I want to leave people with this. There are so many movies that get made where the groom is somewhere in the chapel in the church, and the wedding ceremony hasn't gotten too close to getting started, that he has to be out there, and he's hammering shots, you know, because he's so anxious, he's so scared. You know, I think to get to that point where we could wisely have confidence because we've performed our due diligence and we really know this person, we would trust them with our lives, because that's what we're doing. We're trusting them with our lives when we get married, when we get into a committed monogamous relationship like that. So we don't want to be like that guy. We want to be like the guy who it doesn't represent a leap off a cliff. It represents another step up toward that future that is boundlessly happy.
Wow. Damn, that was good. Great. Well, you heard that. You got all the information now. It's good luck.
Yeah, it's on you. If you screw this up, don't come and see me.
All right. To wrap things up, we have a listener question. Again, if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question is, all right, you ready? It's, I watched your TED Talk, and it sounded like you were describing my marriage because my wife and I have very different sex numbers. I'm really frustrated and made to feel that I must be a sex addict. I do not want to get a divorce, so any advice would be appreciated.
More like sympathy than advice. It's really, you know, once we are who we are, you know, we've gone through our adult years, we have figured out who we are sexually. You know, we all have this number that it would be ideal. You know, we kind of have a sense of how often we ideally would like to have sex in a monogamous committed relationship. And it doesn't matter what that number is. It could be once a day or once a year. But everybody's got a number. And it's this issue again comes from failing to do my due diligence, failing to perform my due diligence. And I didn't ask the question, or if I asked, I got a sneaky answer that I lived with, but I didn't question. And to me, that's another reason why I would like to take a longer time to be with somebody. There's an old joke about the one food that you feed Jewish girls to make them stop having oral sex with men, wedding cake. Yeah. So, and so many Jews have told me that story. It's like I'm etched in acid in my brain. And it's a silly story, but I think the story is that for a lot of us prior to marriage, Jewish or not, we are performative. We're kind of on a probationary period. And then after we get married, we can let our guard down and relax and grow a pot belly and stop shaving and doing all the other things that she used to enjoy us doing the opposite of. And that's just ridiculous. I mean, we should all be getting what we thought we were getting, right? And some of that is on me, and some of that is on the other person to be who they are. And if I'm the kind of guy, nobody wins in a situation where I was tricked, I tell you, into marrying a woman who wanted to have sex twice a month when I'm a once a day kind of a guy. And typically what happens in these cases, this is a long answer, I'm sorry, but in these cases, typically each of them are looking for reasons to justify their own number and reasons why the other person is wrong. And so he's questioning, well, were you sexually abused when you were little? Or do you have sexual hangups? Is it because of your religion? Was your ex-husband abusive to you? And we're all looking to understand, but it's quite natural that in the human race, there's 7 billion plus of us on the planet. There's going to be some diversity of sexual appetites, just as there are for an appetite for sleep or for food. And for some of us, it's the number I hear a lot for people being in the middle is 3 to 4 times a week. And if that's your number, great. But you probably shouldn't be with somebody who wants to have sex every day. and I've seen a big range for every guy who says, well, what's wrong with you? Were you sexually hung up, or were you abused, or do you have body issues, or you're just plain sterile or frigid? That's what it is. You're frigid. And for the woman nowadays, especially, it didn't exist not so many years ago, but now we have the term sex addict. And I don't believe in sexual addiction as a concept, but it sure is a handy way to make somebody feel defensive and ashamed for even wanting to have sex at their normal level. And if you can't break through that, and I would definitely recommend some counseling just to see if there's, not to compromise. This is not a situation where compromise actually works any more than it does for food or sleep, but to see if there's any way we can work through this to where we can accommodate each other comfortably. And I mean emphasis on the comfortable side of things. Because if I want sex once a day and she wants sex once a week, but we compromise and we have sex 3 to 4 times a week, then like that Woody Allen movie where they have the screen split, and he's at his therapist and she's at her therapist, and she's saying, well, God, he's always wanting to have sex. I mean, it's just insane how much he wants sex all the time. I can't even get a break. And he's saying she never wants to have sex. Oh my God, it's like, be starving all the time. And the therapist asks at the same time, so how often do you two have sex? And they each say the same number, 3 to 4 times a week. And that's what a compromise gets you. So now we're okay, good. Now we're both equally miserable.
Yeah.
So somebody who calls me a sex addict, first of all, is buying into something that's as scientific as demon possession or phrenology or bloodletting for physical illness. It's not a thing. They're going to get support from 2 factions. One will be the church. The second will be therapists who make money treating sex addiction. And in either case, it's not a bona fide mental health diagnosis and not a thing. So now it's abuse. I'm just putting you down, like calling a woman frigid because she doesn't want to have sex with you. What are you, some kind of lesbian? Because she doesn't want to have sex with you. That's just abuse.
Yeah.
So if we can figure this out without getting abusive, that'd be great. If we can accommodate each other, that'd be great. But if most of the time, frankly, people can't.
Time to get a divorce. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, it's time to move on and just humbly accept, oops, I made a big mistake. Now, I have another couple I've worked with where he won't have sex with her unless he can make her have an orgasm first. It is his policy to pay for sex and his orgasm with giving her an orgasm, which at the end of the day is really extremely controlling. She loves her husband, and she has many reasons for having sex, including, I love him, I just love the physical closeness, I'm still glad I've got him wrapped around my little finger, that he thinks I'm hot. And she's yelling, welcome aboard, sailor, have a great time, come on in, it's fantastic. But he won't do it. And so there's an incompatibility too, right? And it has nothing to do with their willingness to have sex. It has, at least maybe on her part, on his part it does, because he's got this belief that he has to somehow justify his orgasm by making sure she has an orgasm. So there are a lot of permutations of this dilemma, and it needed to get discussed again before we tied the knot.
Yeah, it ties back into the whole podcast episode.
Yeah. Yes.
Due diligence, intentional interview, spend a year, 2 years getting to know the person before you make that move.
Open your eyes, notice things, ask questions.
All right. Well, thank you for that question from the listener. And thanks a lot, Steve. And we'll see y'all next week.